Yo, I'm Nash Bandit, and today I want to tell a story about a rabbit hole I found myself falling into not too long ago. So, as you all know, I've been super into Kane Roberts for the past year, and recently he announced a new website that uses a different domain than the one that he used to use. His current website is officialkaneroberts.com, but the original domain was kaneroberts.com. Fun fact, that's totally unrelated to this story. I accidentally found that new website domain a week before Kane actually announced it. It's a funny story. I was looking for photos to post on the fan page that I run dedicated to Kane, and I somehow managed to find his site with a photo of his logo. But that's not what this video is about. Now, with the old domain, which has been wiped clean since Kane stopped using it some time ago, I had the fun idea of using a little thing called the Wayback Machine to see how it looked back in the day. And of course, I decided to go as far back as I could. Immediately, I was greeted to what I later found out was a website design aesthetic that was inspired by Kane's collaboration with Alice Cooper on the Brutal Planet album. After processing the aesthetics, something else caught my eye. A link for MP3s that you could download back then. There were MP3s for Phoenix Down, a project of Kane's I was already pretty familiar with. But there was something else listed. Something called Flesh FX, a project that I had never heard of. So I clicked the link, and I am greeted to a teaser for an EP from this Flesh FX project. Then I click the MP3 link, and I see 4 downloadable tracks. 2 from Phoenix Down, which were Reckless and I Want It Again, and 2 from Flesh FX, Inside of You and Funny With Ya. Much to my misfortune, the download links weren't archived properly. And then after googling Flesh FX and getting nothing from it, my hunt began. My search to uncover the mystery of Flesh FX. Let's start off by answering what is probably the first question I had. What exactly is Flesh FX? Flesh FX was a project that former Alice Cooper guitarist Kane Roberts was involved with during the late 90s and early 2000s. His name isn't directly tied to this project, despite the fact that it was advertised on his site, but there are 6 members listed under pseudonyms. On drums, we have Elias the Doctor. On guitar, we have El Kabong and Mr. Gizmo. On bass, we have Spaz45. And on vocals, we have DJ Go and Ponyboy Bernstein. I'll dig more into the members themselves later, though, as I'd like to cover some of the background for this project. After his hiatus from the music industry, where he became involved with graphic design and released a video game called The Lords of Tantraz, Kane would return to the music world with a band called Phoenix Down. And yes, it's named after the Final Fantasy item. Anyways, Phoenix Down released one album called Under a Wild Sky in 1999. But something a lot of people aren't aware of is the fact that this was not the only project Kane was involved with during this time. In comparison to the more melodic sounding Phoenix Down, Flesh FX was a more industrial sounding band. Its general sound was compared to the likes of Static X and 9 Inch Nails by Kane himself in an interview with a fan site back in the day, which was called kane-roberts.com. And I'll read a direct quote from Kane here. Flesh FX is a modern noise-driven project that we still want to get out in 2000. It's in the feel of Static X and 9 Inch Nails. Much like Kane's album The New Normal, which was released in 2019, it seems this project would have stood out from the rest of his works. Once again, Kane's versatility shines through here. During 1999, Kane mentions 2 things about Flesh FX that provides us with a timeline for how the project went. Well, for the most part anyway. It had a planned release for the first half of 2000, and Kane had been working on it for around 3 years at the time. Unfortunately, this early 2000 release date wasn't met, as recording for Flesh FX started in September of 2000, and when it was released, it was only a partial release of an EP during 2001. The EP had 4 songs: Inside of You, Funny With Ya, Drown, and Hexton, Texas. The former 2 songs were downloadable, but the latter 2 didn't get this treatment. So I'll cover those to get them out of the way really quick. Drown is by far the least covered track. In all of the interviews I read involving Flesh FX, Kane never mentioned this song, and the interviewers didn't ask about it. It hasn't resurfaced in any future projects either, and unless it winds up somehow coming up on Kane's next album or Kane gets bored and throws it at his fans for the funny, I don't think we'll ever hear Drown. That's not to say it's impossible, because Kane has a knack for throwing his fans curveballs, but I won't hold my breath. Hexton, Texas, however, actually does get mentioned in the interviews that I read. I'll read the part in one of these interviews where the song comes up. So, are you still in contact with Alice Cooper? Yeah, I'm writing with him for his new album, as a matter of fact. He's in town, and we go to the movies and stuff. He's doing a new album with Bob Marlette, and of course Bob Ezrin's working on it. It's coming out good, and we're writing a song called Hexton, Texas, which is kind of a weird, industrial, heavy, cool song. Yeah, it turns out that Alice Cooper had some involvement with Flesh FX. This isn't too surprising when you consider Alice co-writing the song Full Pull on Kane's 1987 debut album, and his participation in the Lords of Tantraz prior to the Flesh FX project. Oh, and by the way, since I'm mentioning Tantraz here, I made a video on that, so go check that out at some point if you're interested in learning more about that game. Also, the album that Kane mentions here is actually Brutal Planet, which was released in 2000. Kane actually did the artwork for that album, which is why his website had a similar aesthetic at the time. Now, back to Hexton, Texas. I have to wonder why this wasn't one of the 2 downloadable tracks. I mean, considering that Alice's connection would have been a great advertising point, you'd think it would have been downloadable. But to this day, it hasn't been released in any shape or form. Although, Kane does remember the song exists. I asked him about it, and he said he did remember it. But as for whether or not this may resurface, I don't know. I really don't. I feel like this may be the more likely of the 2 non-downloadable tracks to possibly pop up in some future project or something. But again, I won't hold my breath. Even if I don't think it's totally impossible. But I can dream. Now, we move on to the 2 downloadable tracks, Inside of You and Funny With Ya. Each track specifies that it features a specific member, so I'll note those here as I cover each track. Inside of You features Ponyboy Bernstein, and this one is probably the one where I initially got the closest to even getting a glimpse of how it sounds. How so, you may ask? Well, that's because the name Ponyboy Bernstein has actually been associated with Kane prior to Flesh FX. Yeah, it turns out it's in the Lords of Tantraz. Karen Ponyboy Bernstein. Along with her voicing Claudia Horn, we can hear her singing the opening track for Chapter 1, and I'd guess she also sings the music for the credits as well. So, we at least know how one of the vocalists sounded in this band. That's one identity solved. Also, I feel like I have to mention this. For whatever reason, her name is spelled 2 different ways in the credits for the Lords of Tantraz. Karen and Caron. I'm pretty sure it's the latter here after doing some googling and searching, but I just needed to clarify this. Now, Inside You is also the song that got closest to a proper release, as it would later appear on the planned tracklist for one of Kane's albums that wound up not being released. Touched, an album that was planned for a 2006 release. Much like Flesh FX, however, Touched didn't get this release. If anything, Touched got the short end of the stick, as it didn't even get the downloadable track treatment if you don't count Inside You having been downloadable for Flesh FX. Funny With Ya features El Kabong, which made me curious because El Kabong is a guitarist and isn't credited as a vocalist. My first thought was that maybe this was either an instrumental track, or that the guitar was the main focus of the song. But I had no way of knowing because, as I mentioned, these songs weren't archived properly. The download links on the Wayback Machine are dead. So, for a while, I assumed I never get to hear anything from Flesh FX. After all, with how obscure this project is, there weren't any uploads anywhere for either of these tracks. Or were there? I asked Kane about Flesh FX some time ago, and amazingly, he took the time to answer a few questions for me. I learned a few things from this. For one, Flesh FX was not Kane's band. He was just involved with it. Secondly, he only remembered one song, which turned out to be Inside of You, as he mentioned this later in the conversation. Thirdly, he mentioned that he likely didn't have the one song he remembered. but he mentioned a video with this song. There was possibly an upload of this song somewhere that I hadn't seen or heard of. Immediately, I was overjoyed and incredibly curious. Interestingly, he said that it wasn't Flesh FX, but was associated with a different project. And at first I questioned this. I mean, it was absolutely Flesh FX. Had he misremembered it? Maybe he was thinking about how it was almost on the unreleased Touched album. I had no clue. So, with my confusion put on the back burner, I tried to look it up on YouTube. With little success. As you'd guess, I was a bit upset. I assumed the upload was gone. Little did I know it was going to ambush me instead. One day I was looking for Kane interviews for the fan page I run. And as I scrolled down, suddenly it was in my recommended videos. It was a version of Inside of You called Beta F Inside of You from a different project called Brains That Won't Die. Kane may have misremembered the Flesh FX connection, but this had to be the project he meant when he said it was from something else. So, at last, I had one of the Flesh FX songs. And with that, it initially seemed like my journey with Flesh FX had come to an end. I didn't know where Funny Witcha would be, especially if Kane didn't remember that song at all. But as you could tell already, that wouldn't be the end. While my hunt had died down, I would still search from time to time. And then, I came across a forum called Sick Things UK, and a thread that mentioned Flesh FX briefly. It was someone asking if that project was Kane's, and someone else mentioned having the songs. So, I made an account and I messaged them, asking if they still had these tracks. After some waiting, they responded. And they said they'd look, and that they were happy to share the music with me. And then it happened. They had both tracks. They emailed me the tracks. And at last, the biggest part of the Flesh FX mystery had been solved. The songs weren't lost to time. While I had already heard Inside of You in some form, this meant I finally got to hear Funny Witcha. And amusingly, when I posted it to my Kane Roberts fan page, Kane himself was amazed that I had gotten my hands on this track. You know a song was lost when the artist themselves is surprised to see it resurface. And interestingly, Inside of You actually has some differences from the Brains That Won't Die version. For one, it's a longer song, and there's actually a funny thing with some of the lyrics. The Brains That Won't Die version has some censoring, but the Flesh FX version doesn't. The Brains That Won't Die version also has a slight difference in the intro, where it says, "You are a robot." Which is funny because that's actually been used by Kane before on Under a Wild Sky, a track simply called Robot.
You are a robot. You are a robot. You are a robot. You are a robot. You are a robot. You are a robot.
There's also other minor differences, so I seriously recommend listening to both versions back to back to really hear the evolution of the song. The files I got also had track numbers in the metadata, which I wouldn't have known if I hadn't sent these files to a friend of mine. Inside of You is track 1, and Funny Witcha is actually track 3. This is different from the listing on Kane's old site, where Inside of You is still the first track, but Funny Witcha is listed as the second track. Also, if you want to hear the full versions of these songs, I have them uploaded here on my channel, so go check them out. Now, with the songs covered fully, let's look into the other part of the Flesh FX mystery. The members of the band. We know who Ponyboy Bernstein is, but what about the rest of the band? Not only that, but which one was Kane? Or, alternatively, Was Kane one of these people? Initially, Kane's involvement was said to be unknown. I'll once again read directly from the fansite archive. Flesh FX is a band project Kane had been working on for a few years. Now in 2000, he hopes to get it published soon. This band is a more mechanical, techno, completely different from anything you have heard from Kane previously. Kane is apparently producing this effort, not actually playing in it, but Kane himself has not clarified this so far. It's to be a surprise. While initially I thought I'd never get an answer to this, I did eventually get enough evidence that Kane wasn't just producing this band, but was playing in it as well. For one, when I asked Kane about Flesh FX, he confirmed that he, and I quote, sang and made guitar noises. And of course, when you listen to these tracks, that's absolutely Kane singing these tracks, that's undeniably his guitar playing. So, the surprise got its reveal in the end, and as such, Kane has to be one of these pseudonyms. But the thing is, which one is he? He sings and plays guitar. Does he fall under two pseudonyms here? I also asked Kane about this pseudonym ordeal, but he didn't seem to remember. Though he did know his name wasn't directly linked to the project. However, despite having no direct leads from Kane, I can at least try to guess which alias, or aliases, that he used, and maybe I'll get lucky with it. Here goes nothing. I think he was probably Mr. Gizmo. If he used two aliases, he could also be DJ and Go. And my reasons for this are that he's had another link to the name Mr. Gizmo in some way. Mr. Gizmo being the name of a character of his, and also a name linked to Flesh FX, feels like it'd be a hell of a coincidence. And that's not to say it couldn't be a coincidence, but come on. Kane's tendency to reuse or repurpose music stuff would line up with this. A DJ and Go is just a process of elimination, as Ponyboy Bernstein has already covered. With Kane's involvement out of the way, now I can wonder who the rest of the band is. And you'd think that there's no way we could find the identities of the rest of the Flesh FX project. I mean, after all, there's nothing else that the rest of these aliases are really connected to. But it turns out that Kane revealed this in an interview with that old fan site. Thank fuck for that, because otherwise it'd probably still be a total mystery for me. So I'll read Kane's words directly from the old fan site. I composed for myself and tried various styles of music for expressing myself in various ways. I try to listen to almost everything and not to lock myself to anything. This is not only regarding music, it is all kinds of arts, in media or in everyday life. I try to use as many influences as possible, because this increases life experience and the chance of creativity. Actually, I have two projects running. One is more melodic, and this is found on the Phoenix Down album, and the other one is called Flesh FX and is more industrial. Both are so different that you won't believe that the same people are working on it. It turns out that Flesh FX and Phoenix Down are much more connected than I had thought. So, with Phoenix Down having 4 members, Kane Roberts, Gene Allen, Steve DeBoard, and Mike Davis, we can connect the lines from here on out. If I've connected the dots right, Karen Bernstein is Ponyboy Bernstein, Gene Allen is likely Al Kabong, Steve DeBoard is Elias the Doctor, Mike Davis is Spaz45, and Kane is either Mr. Gizmo or DJ and Go, or both of them. And personally, I believe it's the latter here. After all, him saying he sang and played guitar lines up with it. And there's no one else that would fill in the 6th slot if Kane only used one alias. But again, it's all just me theorizing and guessing, even if my guesses are based on pretty solid evidence. Also, I'm sure someone's gotta be wondering, why the pseudonyms? If he revealed the identities of the band, what was the purpose for them? Well, lucky for us, Kane actually gave a reason for this. It's very simple actually, because once again this was on the fansite archive. Why did the musicians on the Flesh FX project all choose to use pseudonyms? Because we're a bunch of idiots. Ah, yes. The most Kane Roberts answer ever. Okay, with everything about these bunch of idiots covered, I think I'm about done here. The mystery of Flesh FX has been uncovered. So what are my thoughts on this project? Well, it's a very interesting band. Personally, I really like it. It shows that Kane has a lot of versatility when it comes to his sound, and I love the creativity that went into everything with Flesh effects, like the aliases and how these songs stand out from the rest of Kane's discography. It might not be for everyone, but I enjoy it. And it's a shame that this project didn't get farther than it did, because it shows off Kane's versatility with his music. Hell, this is probably the best example of that. Flesh effects and Phoenix Down have totally different sounds, but have the same people involved with both projects. And while only Phoenix Down got a proper release, we at least have a taste of Flesh effects. Now, before I end this video, I'd like to thank Saint and Sinner from the 6 Things UK forum for providing me with this Flesh effects tracks so I could share them around online, and the Kane Roberts fan site from back in the day for getting this information in the first place. And of course, I'd especially like to thank Kane Roberts for not only being a part of the Flesh effects project, but for answering my questions about Flesh effects, and for having done all those interviews on that fan site. Without further ado, this has been Nash Bandit, as Kane Roberts would say, rock the fuck on!